Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
After receiving a BA in economics from Union College, Sandy Wilder played professional soccer and then coached, counseled, administered, and taught at Principia College. In 1984, he joined Communico Ltd. And became president and CEO in 1992. There, he consulted, trained, and coached educators and leaders to be more effective, personally, interpersonally, and on teams and in cultures that they create. Sandy started the Educare Unlearning Institute in 2001 and transitioned to it full-time in 2009. There, he is the Chief Listening Officer. Educare offers programs, retreats, vision quests, virtual workshops, and individual coaching, as well as daily unlearning insights and dynamic supportive community to help you do these three things: live freely and authentically from your deepest values, question conditioned thoughts and beliefs, and experience transformation through unlearning, and finally, learn to listen in a way that naturally enriches relationships and encourages authenticity. Well, Sandy, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
You are welcome. You're welcome, Tim.
I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you do and what drives your passion for it.
Sure, happy to. Just a couple of years ago, like maybe 50, I I was in college and I was dating a girl who was a Christian Scientist, and I didn't even know how to spell Christian Science, and I wasn't really into spirituality. I didn't know anything about it. And then I witnessed her having a physical healing. That piqued my interest. Like, what was that about? And then I played a lot of soccer. And then I was playing a soccer game actually in the winter, and there was a little snow in the ground, and I did a split, and it was literally like something ripped. It wasn't a stretch or something. And the pain was so intense, and it took me 20 minutes to get off the field. And I was home from college working, selling Christmas trees for the Kiwanis Club. But I had to go home and get crutches, and I could barely move one leg past the other. And this was on Christmas Eve. And I went over to the store on my crutches to buy a last minute little gift for my brother. And the thought came, God wouldn't keep me from doing what I need to do. That was about the depth of my understanding. And I said, if that's the case, I'm just going to walk out of here. So I picked up the crutches in one hand, and I was standing there, and it wasn't painful when I was standing, just when I was walking, picked up the gift, and then just step. I was perfectly instantaneously healed. And when I went in, it was like sandpaper rubbing together in terms of pain. And I'm just looking around kind of going, what just happened there? Because I had no background in spirituality other than just for 3 months been dating this woman who just began to introduce me a little bit to it. And so that was an absolute game changer, because it opened up potentialities that I had no clue were possible. And so as I talked to some experienced sort of practitioners in the field and healers, I said, are you telling me that if I understand how this works, I can actually help others with this? And they said, no question. And that was it. Just turned the corner. And so ever since then, I dove into Christian Science for many decades. Now it feels much more expansive than that, trying to find more of a common sense and common ground amidst various different approaches, but still very much anchored in a non-dual space and trying to help people access that. So my passion is very simple. It's just to help people find their innate strengths. It's just to be able to find and access the potential that I believe is already in there, especially through what you might call clearing the windshield so that we have the clarity and we can see that. So it's through an unlearning focus, but it's all based on you got the goods already. And so there's nothing I'd rather do than talk to you, teach a class, work with people one-on-one, dive in myself.
So how did you come up with the name Educare Unlearning?
Educare, one of my mentors is Parker Palmer, the Quaker educator, incredible man. And that's where I learned the word educare. I learned about it through that space. I did corporate training and development and leadership development and executive coaching for a number of years. But as I was transitioning out of that more into this deeper realm, that really fit because educare, as you may know, is Latin for the word educate, which means to lead forth our hidden wholeness. And so that really seemed to fit. And then I'm all about unlearning. And so all about just helping people be able to access that hidden wholeness through, in a sense, depersonalizing and letting go of and releasing whatever might be getting in the way of that. So the organization that I named was Educare Unlearning Institute. So it's pretty simple. It describes what we do.
So how would you define or clarify for me your statement? I'm all about unlearning.
My sense is, for years, I used metaphysics, which I would call more of an addition approach, where I was just adding as much inspiration as I could, new ideas and more inspiration, and read this and listen to this and just pile in all these ideas so that I was just filled up with inspiration. And I eventually started to see that that was actually having me spiritually bypass some of the issues that I needed to deal with, some of the things that I was avoiding, some of the fears that I wasn't addressing. And so to me, the unlearning approach is more of a subtraction approach. It's saying, what do we need to remove? It's so that we can, again, shine forth, so to speak, let our soul shine forth. And so the way that I think about it these days is what's absolutely vital is getting in touch with what you are not. Because when you get in touch with what you are not, you can, in a sense, release that and then let out what you are. But if you don't get in touch with what you're not, it's going to influence the entire way that you see everything. And so we get an extremely partial perspective. And so I'm trying to help people expand their view, so to speak.
So when you say get in touch with what you are not, my mind is saying thoughts and beliefs that I'm holding on to that aren't the truth of my nature.
Right. Thoughts, beliefs, patterns, egoic patterns, personality patterns,
Energies, trauma energies, etc.
all of those things. Yeah, whatever it is that you have accepted that actually is transient, that has come into your experience, but you've identified with it enough, that experience or that way of thinking, or I'm the kind who doesn't do this or do that, but it's actually transient. It's something
Not
that
your essence. Yeah.
your mind has glommed onto.
Yeah, I think about as I was raised by these very intelligent, loving people.
Yeah.
And I was raised in the Roman Catholic tradition.
Okay.
I went kindergarten, grade school, high school, and college being taught and trained by the most influential people in my life that this is just the truth of life. Right? This is the one true religion. This is the one true God. This is how life works. This is, and come to find out when I got to college, there were other people on the planet who thought and taught other things.
Right.
It was a shock to my system.
Yeah.
And I tell the story about how when I was in college, somebody, probably several people that I liked and respected, talked about the book Autobiography of a Yogi.
Oh my goodness, one of my absolute favorites. Go ahead.
and as a dyed-in-the-wool little Catholic boy who was just trying to do the right thing and get to heaven any way he could and be as nice and loving as he possibly could,
Of course, right.
I had to run away from that book like it was the plague or on fire.
Wow.
I'm going to burn my hands.
Yeah.
Because it was just, that was anathema. That was absolutely the opposite of everything I knew to be true. And so I ran away from it. I wouldn't touch the book. About 40 years later, after, lots of years of slowly looking at things other than what the Catholic Church would have taught me, and
Exactly.
reading spiritual books and finding friends that I really liked and respected and have them refer a whole bunch of different books. I was reading the Michael Singer book.
Mhm.
I forget whether it was the Untethered Soul or the
Surrender Experiment.
or the Surrender Experiment book, but it was probably when I was reading the Surrender Experiment book several years after I read the Untethered Soul. And he kept saying that this book was so transformative for him. And I thought, well, maybe I should look at that.
Right.
And
Right.
and I absolutely loved it until about 2/3 of the way through. And about 2/3 of the way through, as I was reading it, I felt this grinding, sick feeling in my stomach. And I
Oh,
literally had to put the book, I didn't have to, but I chose to put the book down. Now, by this point in time, I'd educated myself enough about psychology and emotions and energy that I knew I was creating this.
mhm.
So I did the kind of tools that I know to do to get rid of the sick feeling in my stomach and be willing to see what was coming up and release it. And then later that day or the next day, I forget whether it was a day or two, I picked the book up again and read it and loved it. Finished the book and read it again. But
Wow.
but it's that unlearning of all of this. And I
Yeah.
realized when I started doing the work about it, it was at the part where he was talking about his guru, his teacher,
Yeah.
doing things that I knew only Jesus could do. Right? Like no one can do miracle work like this. No
Right.
one
Right.
can return physical, etc. And so I had to, and to use your terms, unlearn
Yeah.
what I knew. I knew
Uh-huh.
as much as I know, this is the
Ah,
top of my head and this is my ear. I just
right. You
knew.
really identified yourself with what you knew.
I'd been trained, like I
Right.
said, kindergarten, grade school, high school, and college. And if we don't understand how limiting that is, and if we don't understand what a limiting subset of information our past experience has been and what our five senses give us, if we don't understand how limiting that is, we never grow beyond it. So
I'd
how do you help people grow beyond that or become aware of the limitations and then release it?
I'll just mention that the Yogananda book, Autobiography of Yogi, did that for me as well. I thought Christian Science had the corner on the healing market. I read that and they're doing as much or more, definitely more. And it was like, okay, here I go. Boom. It's just like absolutely expansive there. There's so many different strategies and different approaches. So I really discern their receptivity and then I offer them various different ways in terms of some examples of different strategies are the Enneagram, the work of Byron Katie, expanded consciousness work, which is which can get into parts work and with a hypnotherapy kind of focus. Some people like to go very deep and relax into those kind of spaces. A lot of it is really just listening. And I've studied Adyashanti a lot and work very closely with his work and just encouraging them to really listen into what matters most and what is most essential for them and to have them, I think of myself as sort of the objective part of their soul, just to reflect back from what they're sharing. And if they're seeing green, I'll really try to understand the green, but I'll say it's kind of looking a little orangish to me. Let me ask you a couple questions and just it's really I call it pulling in beside. It's walking with them and not in any way trying to sort of lead them or even guide them. It's just listening together about how strong their desire is and how much their devotion is. I was just coaching a woman yesterday and she was sort of laying out this whole thing. And towards the end, I said, well, I have a question for you. And she said, sure. And I said, so how devoted are you to working on this? Because depending upon her level of devotion and willingness to work at it, we can take various different approaches. And, I've coached and played soccer at junior high all the way through professional level. And so I'll say to somebody, do you want to you can train at the junior high level or high school level or coach level or professional level. And I'm willing to work with you at any level. And everybody always says, oh, I definitely want the professional level. And I'll say, that's great. I said, so give me a sense of what that might look like for you. And they said, well, I can probably do some spiritual practices, maybe 15 minutes every other day.
Right.
Well, that's great. That's kind of junior high, and I'm going to love you no matter what you do. But this is what I need to know is just, and so we tailor the approach to how much they want to get into it. And then I also want them, in a sense, to define my role about how direct and authentic they would like to be. I've had some clients say, just reflect back to me and walk with me. Don't really ask me any really tough questions. And then I've had others say, if you see a fleck of dirt, call it out.
Right.
Once we have that kind of agreement of how we're going to work together, then we can take any of these approaches that we feel guided to. There's also deep purpose work, getting a really clear sense of why you're here on the planet and what you're called for. So depending upon sort of their receptivity, I try not to do, all just, sort of the higher purpose work or all just the unlearning work. I try to have a balance of them so that they're working side by side and so that we're not sort of floating off into beautiful metaphysics or getting buried in the dirt and the shadow work. And so I try to listen for a blend of that, but they're already bringing a sense of sort of how much they're either stuck in it or not. And some people come and they are just floating around sort of in the clouds and not anchored. And others, as you know, are just so stuck in the dirt. And so it's kind of designed by grace as we go forward.
Well, I think I mentioned to you in one of our pre-interview talks that almost 20 years ago, I got introduced to the work of Dr. Michael Rice, R-Y-C-E, and
Yeah.
he has the same kind of tools. So he'll
Okay.
have a very specific tool for letting go of and dismantling something, another tool for discovering what is that kind of stuff that's hidden in the unconscious that I might need to let go of, another tool for clarifying communication from I'm going to be responsible for every emotion and reaction that I create. Another tool for creating and defining my own sense of purpose as unique from somebody else's, with the recognition that we're all basically the same. And so we've got a primary purpose that's the same for every human being, according to his way of looking at it. And then every individual is going to, based on their skills and preferences and things they're naturally good at and things they love to do, be able to create an individual guiding secondary purpose. And then they can, if they choose to use that tool, when they get up in the morning and they look at, well, here's an activity I might do that's going to consume a considerable amount of time, intelligence, money, and energy. I want to check, is it in alignment with my primary purpose? And is it alignment with my secondary purpose? And if so, I go for it. And if not, I probably don't.
Right. Right.
And so with that, that kind of go all the way around from, as you were talking, the practical day-to-day, I'm down in the dirt stuff, all the way to this bigger sense of picture of who am I and why am I here and what purpose do I serve in life?
Exactly. Yeah.
And if you've got specific tools like you were talking about, I noticed on the website that you're a facilitator who's been trained in the Byron Katie work, and you mentioned Adyashanti's work, and so it gives you that breadth and
Right.
depth of ability to work with people, because not, as you know, not everybody's going to want to do the same thing.
Right. And some of those areas there's huge resistance to. So, I offer the work of Byron Katie whenever, and that's probably the least popular because it just goes right through to the ego and people just kind of go, they just won't even go near it. It's fascinating. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but yeah,
Some
as you
people won't. Yeah, some people just won't.
exactly. Right.
So in what kind of a structure or format do you offer this to people?
Well, there's one-on-one coaching, and then I also offer programs. There's probably 8 or 10 programs I've taught over the years. Right now, since the pandemic, we kind of squeezed down the programs like many and have moved some to Zoom. And now there's a combination of Zoom and face-to-face, but an extremely popular one, well, I say popular meaning the program's running. It's not like they're knocking down the door, but is something called Devotion to Being. And so what that is the same group of 10 people comes together once every 4 months for a 3-day weekend, and we meet 6 times over 2 years. And so it's the same group, and we're building program by program. And in between those 4 months, we have a check-in for 3 hours on Zoom, just to find out how everybody's doing in terms of what they're really focusing on. And they also have what we call a listening partner in between each of those. So throughout the program, you will have maybe 6 or 7 different listening partners, and you have a one-on-one session with that partner each week. And the focus there in the devotion to being is to, like the title says, is to devote to your being through an unlearning space, but it's also coupled with a deep focus on how to really listen in such a way that you can help others find their space as well. So I'm not so much teaching them strategies like the work of Byron Katie, but I'm absolutely teaching them how to listen at a deeply significant level where they're not trying to fix or solve, but they're really being with each other. And then they get to practice that every week.
How do you teach someone to deeply listen? What would be the definition from you for deeply listening?
2 questions there. What's my definition? How do I teach? I think it's to provide an environment that is so accepting and so safe that when they're sharing, they feel free to, in a sense, share what matters most to them, and be begin to discover and share things that they haven't felt safe enough to share before. And then as they get to look at it, because I'll just be reflecting it back or just asking a question about it, but I have no agenda to try and lead them somewhere or fix them or have them figure it out. I'm just trying to create an environment where they can see their soul, so to speak, and see what matters most to them, but also see what might be getting in the way of that. And so it's very much of a, like I was saying before, a walking together. And just as they're describing what they're seeing, I'm just reflecting back and maybe asking a few questions about it to clarify, or ask them to tell me more about it, or possibly say, I see that differently. Can you share, tell me more about this specific? So it actually, the depth of the learning that I teach, and I have 4 dimensions of listening that I teach. It was initially inspired in me by a book called Kinship with All Life by J. Allen Boone, which you may be familiar with, where he listens to animals.
I'm not familiar with it. I'll look into it.
Phenomenal book. Yeah, it's been around for quite a while.
A Kinship with All Life?
Kinship with All Life by J. Allen Boone. And he was basically taught to listen at this deeply significant level by Strongheart, who was a German Shepherd. I won't go into the whole story, but over the years, he developed the ability to be able to listen and communicate with animals. And the only way that he could do it was by seeing that he was 100% equal as a being in the universe to that animal. And he found that when he could, then the ideas were just flowing back and forth, and he was receiving ideas, and he wrote a number of books on this. And so I read that, whatever it was, 45 years ago, and just started to say, wow, we can apply this to each other. What if there was such unconditional acceptance that you were just there and you allowed almost a third thing to emerge between the two of you that was the divine, or whatever you want to call it. And so over the years, I've been teaching into that space. And in a previous program that was a 2-year program, a little bit structured differently, called Authentic Transformation. This may sound a little strange, but we would twice during the program, and that met 8 times over 2 years, we would go to the St. Louis Zoo and sit with an animal for 3 or 4 hours, just quietly observing, appreciating, and listening to see what would come up. So people would have read the book, and then we would go and you just pick any animal that you feel led to and just stay there. And, the typical person at a zoo stays at the exhibit about 5 minutes and, comments and then moves on. And we got our Crazy Creek chairs and we're just sitting there and just settled in and just listening. And one time I was doing this with chimpanzees, and people were coming and going. And then one of the workers with the chimpanzees came over and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just appreciating just this being in front of me and just really just listening and seeing if there's any type of communication." And she looked at me and said, "Gosh, I'm so grateful that somebody is seeing the chimpanzees as we are." And so I've received some incredible communication, but the beauty of that is it runs you into your ego big time, because you sit there going, "I can't hear a darn thing," and I'm listening to an animal and it's really hot. People say, "What are you doing?" And I say, "I'm listening to animals." And they think, so there's all kinds of stuff that gets in the way. But if you can find that zone, it's really, really powerful. So that's a long answer to say, also, how do I teach it? Is I model it in front of the group, and we create what Parker Palmer calls a circle of trust in the group. And so we have a sense of not trying to fix anybody. And so we're practicing it in everything we do, in terms of really just asking honest questions, but not trying to, just no agenda, not trying to have anybody.
Well, and that's what comes to my mind when I hear you talk about it, is that the quality and the intent and motivation for the question would be critical. So if I'm asking a question, or if I'm basically making a statement framed as a question,
Right.
or if I'm asking a question to try to get somebody to see something,
Right. Exactly.
that's that outer thing. And I want somebody, I'm going to ask this question so I can illuminate them. But if I'm asking a question because I genuinely want to understand their perspective or
Right.
their understanding, it reminds me of Bruce Ecker and Laurel Hulley wrote the book DOBT, Depth-Oriented Brief Therapy.
Oh, I don't know that. Okay.
And it's now called coherence therapy. They changed the name years later. But in that work, there is this process of what he calls radical inquiry, which is basically your listening, right?
Okay.
Your deep level of listening.
Okay.
Is that if I can get an understanding, a deeper level of understanding of what's going on inside the person across from me or that I'm sitting with or talking to, the meaning of the words they have, the layers of complexity of that, what it feels like to them in their body to have, they'll use this word sad. If I just ask just to understand it better. So I'm asking them to teach me about their experience, their lived experience in the moment.
Beautiful.
That's the radical inquiry.
Yeah. To me, there's no probing to that. It's beautiful, it's radical, and it's deep, but there's no probing to figure out. There's just this beautiful sense of exploring it together. Yeah. I like that radical inquiry.
Well,
Yeah.
and they have the same fundamental observation that you do, which is basically it's all in there, right? And whatever signs or symptoms or problems that a person develops that lead them to go to a therapist or a medical doctor,
Right.
these are patterns, coping mechanisms that the person has developed over time for really good reasons. And if they can become aware of those reasons, one of two things will happen. They'll either reframe it as, oh, this is a really useful coping mechanism. I'm going to quit calling it a problem. I'm not going to keep going to doctors to have them help me get rid of this symptom. Or they're going to understand, you know what? I developed this pattern to cope with this level of issue when I didn't have any better way to cope with it.
Yes,
And
exactly.
now I'm, 15 or 20 or 30 or 50 years later, I have all kinds of more advanced ways of dealing with that.
Yeah.
So I can let go of that coping mechanism and bring in one that produces consequences that I prefer.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And it happens kind of in this organic flow. I mean, there's none of this, well, let us help you get rid of this symptom, right? It's a radical inquiry is basically developed to help that person know, after I've asked them to show me, what is the set of dynamics within that person that makes it important for them to create the symptom.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So we look at the pro-symptom position, and once we shine a light on that, then the person can understand, oh, that's why I've been doing this. That's really useful. I'll keep doing it, or I've got a better way to get that, achieve
Right.
that goal.
Yeah. Sounds very similar. Yeah. I like the way you're describing it.
It's called coherence therapy, and Bruce Ecker and Laurel Hulley were the originals.
Beautiful. Yeah. It feels like at that deepest level, it's like the words are formed for you. You called it organic. I mean, you just feel like you're both listening together almost to music, to a choreography and with what's happening there. There's no, oh, what should I say next or anything like that. And there's a lot of pausing and it just a beautiful sense of, I think the Sanskrit call it anahata, which is in the heart space, which is the unstruck divine melody in the heart. So it's unstruck, it's already within. And so that's what we're listening to, is that beautiful anahata as that energy and those ideas kind of reveal itself. And it does take a lot of practice because I mean, think about it. We're trained in writing, we're trained in reading, we're even trained sometimes in speaking, but listening is the activity that we use the most in theory, and there's no training in it. I even trained some of this in the corporate world, and I would say, how many of you have had training in listening? And only if somebody had a master's and, and got into counseling or something, but other than that, nobody's trained in listening. So it's the most used and the least taught skill. And so that's why it's so rare. It's so incredibly rare. One of the biggest challenges that the people in the programs find is they don't have anybody in their life that listens to them other than the people in the class.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's simple. It's not rocket science, but we need to learn it.
And once you get that experience of being, listened to or connecting with another person that way, it's kind of a shock to the system, both how different that is from our everyday busyness and how little it exists outside of a program like that.
Right. In our culture.
Yeah.
And in indigenous cultures, they're listening to, trees and plants and animals and birds, all kinds of things. But we've been trained away from that.
The thought that comes to my mind is, obviously there are 4 or 5 of them bouncing around up there because I can't get one specific one out. The idea, one thought I had was to ask, so how do people connect with you? We'll save that for before we're done. But the other one is, what's the kind of an intro? If I wanted to just put my toe in the water with you, or put a foot in the pool rather than dive in the deep end, what do you have those kind of scalable levels of involvement that you offer people?
Something that I do is every day I write what I call an unlearning insight, which is usually just a brief poem, but it needs to be a moment of new clarity for me each day. And I've been doing this for about 13 years. And so I publish that on my website, on Instagram, Facebook, and then I send it out to whatever, 600-700 people literally around the globe as an email. And so if somebody says, how do I know if I'm interested in working with you? I like your website, but how do I know? And I say, well, if you can resonate with these insights, then there's a lot we could talk about and explore. But if you look at these and you kind of go, that guy's in outer space, then it's not going to work. And so it's a spiritual practice for me that I just love to do, but I'll take anywhere from half an hour to an hour and a half each day and just drop into that space with some new moment of clarity. And it could be a topic that I've explored before, but it's just new and crystal clear today. And so that's really, in a sense, my marketing. I'm as much as I lived in the corporate world and we did all that marketing kind of thing, I'm about just tapping into my own depth and taking time for my own spirituality. And then I can share it in this way. And then if that brings people to my door, then that's great. And so usually it's word of mouth and those insights. And because people that can relate to them typically want to go deeper.
So how do people, connect with that if they want to receive the email or?
Well, it's just Unlearning Insight. I call them Unlearning Insight. It's just unlearninginsight.com. And you can just sign up. It's also on Instagram under Educare Unlearning or Facebook. and it's also on my website. But yeah, you could just drop me an email and I can sign you up, or you just sign up. You can unsubscribe whenever you want. It's free, and it's every day of the year.
And then you mentioned this, one of the programs you mentioned, I think it was called Devotion to Being.
That's right.
Oh, look at me.
I
Look at my
know.
brain actually worked.
Well done.
That goes over a 2-year period, and you meet 6 times, and that
Yeah,
seems to me, especially for a lot of the people that I run into, a massive commitment.
it is a huge.
Is there something that's less of a commitment, either in terms of time or the range of the 2-year commitment that you offer people?
Pre-pandemic, I had about 6 classes, and a lot of them were one-off classes. And like Living on Purpose, there's a 3-day program to help you discover your purpose. The Work of Byron Katie, there's a 2-day class in that. Sometimes I would do retreats with a good friend of mine who's an amazing singer. And so we would combine some of the pieces that I'd be reading with what she'd be singing, and then we'd discuss them and explore them. And so there's various ways that I used to do that. Not doing that as much anymore. So typically it's more through one-on-one coaching. So they can have an introductory session for free, and we can talk about it and then start to explore it. I also offer, but again, it can sound overwhelming, but a 10-month program on the Enneagram, but that's just one night a month for 2 or 2.5 hours. We're exploring each type. And so
is that something you do one-on-one?
No, with a group.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is that something that you have enough of a flow that's going on a regular basis?
Well, I start one every year.
Okay.
So just like the Devotion to Being program, there's 2 running, but one starts every year. So those 2 programs are going, and then this is going, the Enneagram class. I do sometimes offer like the purpose work or the Enneagram class just one-on-one with people because they really want to dive into that space. So because I don't really market myself in terms of like going on the speaker circuit, or, I do have an email list that I send out upcoming programs. Oh, I'll tell you one more that I do as well. So I do send out things occasionally, but I'm not spending a lot of time and effort trying to fill classes, and then you have a minimum amount of classes, and if you don't run, it doesn't happen. With these longer classes, I just market them once a year. I get people that are devoted to it, and then we can really build. And then there's lots of coaching that goes on individually. The other thing that I do offer that I didn't mention is in the summers, I'm in Acadia National Park up in Mount Desert Island, Maine, Southwest Harbor, Maine, near Bar Harbor. And we have a cottage on the ocean there, and I offer vision quests. And so people will come for a week. It's not a hardcore vision quest in terms of I just drop them off and I'll see you in 4 or 5 days. They stay at the cottage, but they're there for a week, and they have 4 solo days in Acadia National Park, which could be anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. And they're in silence for 4 days. Some of them are fasting. And it's a time of deep reflection, an incredibly beautiful place. They have an optional half-hour meeting with me each evening, which some do and some don't do. And we take the time. I've given them a map, and I've given them trailheads, and we probably ahead of time gone out for lobster or whatever we do, but we've set it up well. It's a maximum of 4 or 5 people. It's usually 2 or 3 that would be there for a week. I offer it 4 times, 1 in June, 2 in July, 1 in September. And so then they have their 4 solo days. And then the last day we debrief all together. So we've gotten to know each other as a group. We've had the opening meeting. Then you're completely on your own. They're not interacting with each other. They're just talking to me either about what they're learning or just where do you want to go the next day and at what time. And I give them plenty of water and just help them with that. And then the last day, they reflect back what the learning has been. They each have an hour to an hour and a half to sort of tell their story from the 4 days. So I offer that. And again, I don't market it hugely, but it's on the internet, and some people have come year after year because it's so incredibly meaningful, and it's in an absolutely gorgeous space, and it really is an opportunity to go deeply into if there's life issues you're looking at, or if there's life issues you're not looking at, but you know you need to. Could be career, could be family, marriage, could be health, could be anything. This is a beautiful opportunity to do that. And there's an overall indigenous culture rites of passage focus. So I weave in some of the training that I've had in that. And I've done a number of vision quests myself.
It sounds powerful.
It's really powerful.
And of course, it's in an for many what would be considered an idyllic setting.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, our cottage is literally just, it's on the ocean looking out at the mountains. And so some people spend the first half of the day just sitting on the deck, just like, because it's perfectly quiet and absolutely gorgeous. And then they want to go out in the afternoon. So fine, I take them out for 5 hours and drop them off and pick them up. And you can sleep in, you can do whatever you want, but there's no reading. There's no, you're off the grid. I mean, it's really a time just to be quiet. And so it's very sacred, very sacred. It sounds scary to a lot of people. So a lot of people are interested, and then they go, oh no, it's just not going to work this year. You know, so it's not unusual. There's a lot of resistance.
Well, and it doesn't take long for us to get acclimated to this doing lifestyle in our busyness before what used to be wonderful for us is something we use to generate fear. I know the gentleman that taught me, my good friend from high school, taught me to do the backpacking in the mountains, and taught me about the gear, and taught me about all kinds of foods to eat, etc.
Okay.
A few years later, after he'd been living in Seattle, I invited him down to go backpack in the mountains, and he was absolutely in a panic because we lost the trail, and what if we can't get back to the car, and what if we don't have a radio, and this is before cell phones and all those GPS locators and things. And it was a shock to me, because this was the gentleman who taught me how to do this, and how much fun it can be to get unplugged, etc. And that's at a time when being plugged in meant you had a radio, or a store you could drive to in 5 or 10 miles. But so we are creatures of habit, and I know that can be scary for some people, but you're doing that again. You're going to do it in June, and then you're going to do it twice in July and one in September of this year.
That's right. Yeah, every year I offer 4 different vision quests, and yeah, there's still room in them, and it's and there's a lot of, I don't know your age, but roughly older folks, although I've had younger folks as well, that don't want to do the hiking, camping, and 4 days drop me off like some of the other ones that we've done. And so they appreciate a nice place to sleep, but they do appreciate the solitude and the devotion. So I have a few people that come every 4 or 5 years and just kind of, it's time to really drop back in again. I have one woman in New York City. This is her 9th one. I've offered it for 13 years. And she says, wouldn't be the same without it, because I'm so busy with all that's happening there. And this allows me to really just drop in.
Wonderful. Well, so the best way for people to reach you, what's the core website?
Just educareunlearning.com.
So Educare, EDUCARE.
That sounds like Educare, but yeah, right. Educareunlearning.com.
Unlearning.com. Well, if you just take a minute and take a breath and get centered and think, okay, we're running low on time here because of my schedule.
It's fine.
What's something that either we haven't asked you about yet, or something we've already talked about that you want to go back and highlight for us?
I think the listening is really key. Learning to listen to yourself, learning to listen to your soul. One of the most powerful, you could call it a strategy, but it's something that I practice every day and encourage a lot of people. I call it taking dictation. And it's simply getting really quiet and dropping in and asking the universe, the divine, whatever you want to call her, what do I need to see and feel right now? And then really listening and really taking notes, because I believe that our guidance is innate. And so many people say to me, well, how do I know if it's the divine? How do I know if it's the ego or whatever? And the question is actually, to me, irrelevant. If you're willing to drop in, you're going to hear the deepest thing you're ready to hear, but we have to provide a space for that. So a lot of the listening that I'm teaching is teaching people how to listen, in a sense, to their soul or to the universe, to their true self, to their intuitive, deepest nature. And then they can bring that into relationship with others. So that kind of a tool, that's what I do every night when I'm doing the unlearning insight, is I just sit quietly and take dictation and listen. And it's a sort of a cooperative, co-creative space, but I'm not the source. I'm receiving, but I get to work with what I'm given. And so it feels like a cooperative adventure with the divine. And so that sense of being guided, to me, is really, really crucial. And so that's a tool that can be developed, really, really useful for people. It keeps you fewer detours, let's say. Certainly don't avoid all the pitfalls, but there's fewer detours there. So that's, and I have a sheet that describes that. So if somebody happened to be listening to this and that's all they wanted, just send me an email and I'll send that over. Happy to give it to you. But it does take practice, but it's not rocket science. Nothing I teach is rocket science. It feels like everything I teach feels so simple. It's challenging because of the ego and the conditioned mind that gets in the way. But I don't feel like anything that I'm doing is unapproachable. If there's vulnerability and humility and an openness, then anybody can access these ideas and access their strengths and potentially help others as well.
Yeah, and access a source within themselves of guidance,
Exactly.
of wisdom. It came to me a while ago to say, wisdom can't be possessed. It can only be accessed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
an example of how the egoic mind is so well trained. As I said that, somebody said to me, "Oh man, that's brilliant. Look at how smart you are that you came up with that." You
Right.
know, the great and powerful Dr. Hayes just came up with this thing. And I thought, you know, there's a perfect example of being blind.
Yeah.
But it also put me in mind, as you were talking about it, of this, in this unlearning little practice you have, of the research they did back in 1991 about kind of the nerve cells that are around the top of the heart. And there's literally a thinking function at the top of our heart. And the
Wow.
heart math stuff that talks about how, of all the connections that go between the heart and the brain, we think most of them would be from the brain sending signals to the heart, but the vast majority of them go the other direction. And so it's tapping into this innate wisdom in this, or this pipeline to a higher wisdom than we can contain within the little cranium we have. That stuff was coming to mind when you were talking about that daily
Right.
practice.
Yeah, I'm continually trying to get people to drop into the heart space. Yeah, and follow that intuitive anahata, that guidance that is there. And so,
And it's what Rilke, Rainier Maria Rilke, would talk about as our need to learn to live in the question.
yes, totally.
And when we ask a really good question, the mind that asks that question isn't even capable of understanding the answer. It needs to live along through experience into a space where it may live along one day into an answer.
Exactly. And to me, I'm continually helping people shift from the figure out mind into the space where it's revealed.
Yes.
So,
And that's the Dr. Michael Rice, the worksheet he has, a lot of people reject it because it looks like a tax form, but it's essentially doing what you just said, shifting from the figure it out mind but mapping out what's my mind doing in the first 3 steps to create all this turmoil and decision that I'm right and the world's wrong, it needs to change this way or that way, and then cancel all of that and shift into that heart space or that asking to be shown.
right.
It's a real powerful dynamic that every time you're doing his worksheet process, which by the way is very similar to Byron Katie's work or Diedrich Wolzak's worksheet process, you know, the choose again worksheet process, because we need to just get out of the head and into the heart.
Exactly. And we're so conditioned in our culture to be in the head. Yeah.
Well, I thank you greatly for being willing to share with us, and it's I'm going to send Pierre Pradervan a thank you note for mentioning you in my interview with him, so that we can can give him the kudos. But it's a delight to meet you and hear what you do, and
Sounds like we're very similar in what we're doing in many ways. So yeah, I appreciate that. You're obviously doing great work too. So thanks for this opportunity. Love to explore these ideas.
Yeah, it's an absolute blessing. Thank you so much for the time.
All right. Thanks, Tim. All the best.
After receiving a BA in economics from Union College, Sandy Wilder played professional soccer and then coached, counseled, administered, and taught at Principia College. In 1984, he joined Communico Ltd. And became president and CEO in 1992. There, he consulted, trained, and coached educators and leaders to be more effective, personally, interpersonally, and on teams and in cultures that they create. Sandy started the Educare Unlearning Institute in 2001 and transitioned to it full-time in 2009. There, he is the Chief Listening Officer. Educare offers programs, retreats, vision quests, virtual workshops, and individual coaching, as well as daily unlearning insights and dynamic supportive community to help you do these three things: live freely and authentically from your deepest values, question conditioned thoughts and beliefs, and experience transformation through unlearning, and finally, learn to listen in a way that naturally enriches relationships and encourages authenticity.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.